This is our special City Council meeting at 4:01 p.m. on Wednesday, June 9, 2021. May we please have a roll call?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Hensy.
Here.
Councilmember Lyons.
Here.
Councilmember Mosca.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Kranz.
Here.
And Mayor Blakespear.
Here.
Record will show that all members of the City Council are present.
Okay, thank you. Because we have our regular meeting, after this, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance at our regular City Council meeting. And so we'll move right into our agenda items, which is 4A, introduction of proposed fiscal year 2021, 2022, and 2022-2023 operating budget. Could you let us know how many public speakers we have?
Mayor, we have no public speakers on 4A, and we have 2 public speakers on 4B.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and hand this over to staff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm pleased to let you and the council know that we are proposing today a budget that is balanced and keeps within your designated council policy reserves. And we are divided into 2 sections for the budget today. The first will be operating, which will be covered by Assistant Finance Director Tom Gallup, and then he will turn it over to Finance Director Teresa McBroom, who will be discussing the capital budget. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Tom.
Right. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and City Council members. This afternoon's presentation is an introduction of the proposed 2-year operating budget, which is a detailed document that outlines the proposed revenue and expenditure plans for each department over the next 2 years. The City of Encinitas operates on a 2-year budget cycle for which the city approves the budget for both years, but only appropriates funding for the first year. The agenda report provides detailed information about the proposed budget for all funds of the city. In this presentation, I will highlight the status of major revenues and expenditures and significant variances in the general fund 2-year budget. Department directors and division managers are available to answer specific questions about their department's budgets or requests. Development of the 2-year operating budget was a 6-month process that began January of 2021. Budget submissions were reviewed in March and April by finance staff and the city manager to ensure the most efficient and effective use of resources. Overall, the budget was developed to meet the council's focus areas and recent direction from the city council strategy session. This year, the operating and capital budgets have been made available online in a budget and brief utilizing the city's OpenGov platform on the city's website. Today's meeting provides an opportunity for public input and council discussion and direction. On June 23rd, the 2-year operating budget will be brought back to the City Council for final adoption, along with approval of the required GAN appropriation spending limit calculation. The operating budget was developed to closely align with these 4 council focus areas. The proposed 2-year operating budget is balanced and promotes financial sustainability and funds council priorities. The city's revenue continues to grow due to increases in total assessed property values, development activity, a rebound in consumer spending, and the opening of a new hotel. Future pension obligations and debt service payments for the financing of capital projects have been built into the operating budget. The general fund contingency reserve is funded at 20% of operating expenditures, and the budget stabilization reserve is funded at 2% of operating revenue. Combined, the reserves are estimated at $17.6 million at the end of fiscal year 22-23. The budget maintains or enhances service levels in a number of areas, including housing services, mobility, and maintenance, as well as restores programs that were suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, the operating budget provides staffing, contractual, and material support for proposed or completed capital projects, anticipates increases in existing contracts, and includes additional maintenance for new parks, trails, and rights-of-way, maintains funding for the city's tree wellness and urban forest management program, provides resources to support the Housing Action Plan, Measure H implementation, redistricting, and mobility projects, as well as additional contract planning services, invests in information technology, including increased network security, disaster recovery capabilities, collaboration software and applications, and new software for document management and electronic signatures to improve staff efficiency. The budget maintains funding for facility maintenance and improvements, including those for the former Pacific View Elementary School site, and also includes the replacement of equipment and vehicles with new alternative fuel models to meet climate action plan goals. In the proposed 2-year operating budget, total revenues, as shown in blue, continue to exceed expenditures, shown in red, plus net operating transfers to other funds, shown in green, providing for a balanced operating budget. The general fund is the city's largest and most discretionary fund and the focus of this presentation. Total estimated revenues are expected to increase by $4.8 million in fiscal year 21-22 and $4.5 million in fiscal year 22-23. Property tax, sales tax, and transient occupancy tax, otherwise known as TOT, account for 85% of total general fund revenue and are key drivers in revenue growth. The city has experienced positive growth in property taxes over the last 20 years, including during the most recent recession. The Finance Department contracts with HDL companies to monitor and provide general fund revenue projections for both property tax and sales tax. Staff reviews HDL's projections and revises them to provide a cushion against unanticipated economic factors that may negatively affect revenue. The property tax estimate is projected to increase $2.1 million in fiscal year 21-22 and $2.9 million in fiscal year 22-23, primarily from gains in assessed values. The city also has a diversified sales tax base that is not heavily dependent on any one business or industry. The city made significant budget reductions in this category in the current fiscal year in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The sales tax estimate is projected to increase by about $1.1 million or 8.2% in fiscal year 21-22 and $700,000 or 4.8% in fiscal year 22-23 as consumer spending increases as the economy recovers and discretionary income levels and demands for goods grow over the next 2 years. Revenues from TOT are also expected to nearly double in fiscal year 21-22 following the opening of the new Alila Maria Beach Resort and will experience positive growth as the tourism industry continues to recover from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I mentioned this year, the Finance Department has expanded the use of its financial transparency portal to include a budget and brief with interactive features that allow the public to drill deeper into the budget to review all revenues by category. Demonstrating this, the platform will differentiate between each category of revenue, and as shown on the chart, property tax and sales tax account for the majority of revenue the city collects. In addition, you can see the data is presented as a table for easy reference by the public and policymakers. proposed general fund operating budget expenditures will increase by $4.5 million in fiscal year 21-22 and $2.2 million in fiscal year 22-23. Already built into the budget are current labor contracts, CalPERS pension obligation and other post-employment benefits, proposed additional staffing, increases in the law enforcement contract, attorney services, new technologies, negotiated increases in current service and maintenance contracts, as well as additional maintenance for new sites, and election costs in fiscal year 22-23. Additionally, another example of how OpenGov can be utilized. As you can see, salary and benefits make up 51% of the operating budget, with contracts and services accounting for 47%. And you can see a comparison down below for both years by category. This chart displays expenditure by department. Together, fire, marine safety, and law enforcement comprise 46% of the proposed budget of $76.5 million in fiscal year 21-22. Transfers are used to move money between the different funds of the city and must be appropriated at the fund level. Many of the budget adjustments proposed for other funds also affect general fund transfers in and out. General fund transfers in are expected to remain flat over the next 2 years. Transfers out of the general fund are proposed to increase by $1.2 million in fiscal year 21-22 and $860,000 in fiscal year 22-23, primarily due to additional funding for the self-insurance program, which is an internal service fund, and loan payments to iBank for capital project financing. Listed here are some of the significant revenue variances in the operating budgets for funds other than the general fund in fiscal year 21-22. Staff is anticipating grant funding for the coastal storm damage, leading pedestrian intervals, Coast Highway 101 separated bike lanes, and Coast Highway 101 walkway to Solana Beach projects, which are recorded in the state capital grant fund. Additional revenue from the newly adopted organics fee and an approved increase in the franchise fee with the city's solid waste provider EDCO is budgeted in the solid waste, recycling, and household hazardous waste fund. Revenue from the city's share of the 1.5 cent sales tax from Transnet is expected to be higher than the current fiscal year. The general fund subsidy for the self-insurance internal service fund will increase, as mentioned earlier. Fees collected from new development for traffic mitigation will be lower than anticipated this year. Fees collected during the current fiscal year were higher due to major projects being completed. And lastly, CARES Act funding was budgeted in the current fiscal year in the federal capital grant fund budget. The fiscal year 21-22 budget does not yet include the American Rescue Plan Act funding, which will be appropriated by council at a later date. Listed here are the significant expenditure variances in the operating budgets for other funds, including an additional budget appropriation in the machinery and equipment replacement fund, primarily for the purchase of 3 dump trucks and a mini excavator, an increase in the Cardiff Sanitation Division's share of the San Alejo JPA's operating budget, purchase of a Type 6 fire engine in the fire apparatus fund to replace the unit leased from the county, expenditures for the new organics program in the solid waste, recycling, and household hazardous waste fund, and a reduction in the facilities maintenance fund budget, which is the result of emergency repairs expense for Fire Station 1 that were budgeted in the current fiscal year. This concludes my presentation. Staff is available to answer any questions at this time.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We need to make sure that everyone on staff knows the name of our newest park, which is Olympus Park, not Standard Pacific Park. So if we can make sure and update that in future presentations, that would be really great. Thank you for the in-depth presentation. And I see my council member, sorry about the sun that's in my eyes a little bit. My council member colleague, Mosca, has his hand up, so go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a few questions for staff, if that's okay. The first question is about property tax. And so there's some kind of conversation dialogue out there about the fact that the prices are going up similar to the way that they went up in 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, which led to 2008. I saw some discussion of the U.S. Senate the other day that said that, you know, there was a kind of debate between Chase Manhattan Bank and Citibank saying, you know, whether it was a bubble, whether that bubble would burst. Just wondering in terms of the fact that this is like 50% of our revenue here in the city. And I know Prop 13 kind of shaves off some of those valleys and peaks for us. But how are we looking going into the future, and how are we forecasting those revenues?
Good afternoon, Councilmember Mosca. Thank you for that question. We feel that the property tax revenue for the city is still very strong, and a lot too has to do with the opening of the Alila Maria Hotel. So they opened up in the springtime. We're not going to see any increase until next fiscal year when they're assessed at January 1st. So properties are assessed at January 1st based on that timeline and who owns the property. And then July 1st is when we'll see the increases in that. And this year we may see an increase if they've closed out and they've got supplemental, but we haven't received that yet. So we are feeling really strongly about and very positively about property taxes.
And so I guess even so with Prop 13, even if we saw some sort of bust or burst of any kind of bubble in the future, I mean, a lot of the folks are saying it's not like 2008 because it's not over leveraged and people are just kind of moving around, which is causing some of the prices to go up and maybe see rents in like places like New York go down or San Francisco down. But we're seeing property values go up. But you're saying that we have some big properties coming onto the tax rolls, that's going to increase it. And even if we basically saw down the line some downward movement, it would take some time before we would see that in terms of our property tax revenues because of Prop 13.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And then sales tax.
Well, as you mentioned too, you know, this is a different recession than the 2008 recession. So it is not similar. And even in 2008, our assessed valuations did not decline. It continued to grow. So,
I mean, that's a good point too, that really where you saw in the newer communities where you saw a lot more speculation in the marketplace, we saw the deepest drop, and where you have kind of a older community more built out, that you didn't actually see the drop. All right.
Yep.
And then in terms of sales tax, we're seeing increases, but how does that compare to pre-pandemic? Are we back up to, when we look at 21, 22, 23, are we back up to where we were pre-pandemic?
We are increasing in sales tax, and that's mainly due to the online increases, and also due to they're no longer new legislation, but they were new a couple of years ago. And because of the online sales people, or like, for example, at sea, they're now required to remit their sales tax to us. So we've seen an increase due to that. And then during the pandemic, we actually didn't do as badly as we thought. And that's because we had big box stores such as Home Depot and Target and Walmart. And then we also had car sales, which helped us a lot.
So when we say, so just to be clear, so when we say that we're seeing a certain increase in 21, 22, is that as high as it was pre-pandemic? Or if not higher? Are we
It will
fully
be
back
higher.
to it? It will be higher than it was when we went into the pandemic.
Yes, yes. And actually,
All right.
during the pandemic, we still came out a little bit higher. We did better
So
than thought.
our sales tax never actually dropped during the pandemic?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, perfect. Law enforcement, we're up to $17 million per fiscal year on law enforcement. Did we increase during the pandemic? Because we relied on law enforcement for a whole lot of stuff, when we were basically putting in place restrictions that we were, we had to based on county guidance and state guidance. Did we see that line item go up because of the increased amount of law enforcement that we asked for enforcement of some of the restrictions?
We did not. We have money that we normally use for downtown direct patrol, and that covered the cost for the additional mask force that they were doing for us.
All right. When is the next contract negotiations? I know that we work with all the contract cities, which I think there are 8 or 9. When is that up?
That comes up in the next year in 2022.
2022. And then who are the negotiating parties with that for us?
It's the 8 cities that contract with the sheriff, and it's the city managers in essence that do the negotiating.
I know that we saw a big, I would say a fairly large increase over the last several years, and I think going into the future, it's been over a 5% increase in this line item. So I would want to kind of find out, and I think a lot of that was motivated by pension liabilities. And so I would want to know, in the future, when we enter into negotiations, where we're at with pension liability for deputy sheriffs and what we're looking at for the future and how we can kind of, build into these negotiations a bit less of kind of sticker shock and large increases. Because we're now, if we continue with those increases, we'll be approaching $20 million in the next several years with law enforcement. Solid waste, the franchise fee, does that go right into general fund, or because it sounds like you guys put it into almost a lockbox and it's earmarked for certain services? Isn't that a general fund item?
Yes, that is a general fund item.
But somehow you've allocated towards certain services or certain programs, and that so because like if I looked at franchise fees for SDG&E or any other utility that pays us franchise fees that does business in our public right away, we have flexibility of using that franchise fee. But here it looks like it's kind of allocated toward programs having to do with solid waste.
Yeah, so we do mainly have it come to the general fund, and then some portion is in that solid waste fund.
All right. And those are all programs having to do with like the recent regulations on organics?
Yes, it does.
All right. And then last question, just for now. We talked about, I think it was like $100,000 that you showed. There was a lease from the county on a fire engine. I know that we had, I remember we had worked out a really sweet deal with the county for a fire engine at the Levenheim Fire Station, but I thought it was like $1 a year or something like that. I remember everybody going crazy and raising their hands and partying. It was $1. And for some reason, I just saw $100,000. And so I'm just scratching my head.
That lease is coming to an end. So I believe Tom or Teresa can correct me, but I believe that lease is coming to an end and we will be needing to purchase a vehicle.
So is that $100,000, just to be clear, is that $100,000 going to the county to lease a vehicle through the county? Or was it $1 a year for a lease through the county? Because I would imagine that we would get better, nothing against the county, but we have pretty good interest credit rating. And so why wouldn't we basically do a deal ourselves? Why wouldn't we just go directly to market? Why would we use the county?
Well, once that lease ends with the county, we will be purchasing our own. So it will not be through the county anymore.
All right, so the future cost that you're associating with a fire engine is that cost when you go into the market to purchase or lease a fire engine?
That's correct.
All right, and so we're currently paying $1 a year for a fire engine to the county.
Yes,
that's
correct.
coming to an end. All right.
Yeah.
All right, and is that still for there was this is probably not a good question for it. It was still like I don't see Chief Stein on there, but it was still like a type 2, one of those smaller agile engines that were really uniquely situated for wildfire areas like Leeuwenhoek. But recently I've seen like the bigger truck back there, the bigger, slower truck back in Leeuwenhoek, and I'm hoping that it was just like that the smaller, more agile one was just needing some fixing or something of that nature. Anyways, that's probably a question for Chief Stein at some point. All right, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Was there anyone who wanted to answer that fire truck question about whether we're buying the smaller agile ones, which I hope is true?
Yeah, you know what? Thank you, Madam Mayor. We are going to check on the details of that and hope to have an answer before the end of this meeting, but I'm just double checking.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Actually, good evening.
Madam,
Chief Stein will talk.
Yeah, Madam Mayor and City Manager, good evening, Chief Stein, and I am unmuted now. And yes, that fire engine is for Leeuwenhoek, and it is the smaller Type 6, more agile, smaller unit.
Okay, great. Thanks for calling in or coming in to tell us that. Deputy Mayor Krantz.
Thank you. Appreciate all the effort that went into this process. It is pretty critical issues, obviously. A couple of questions relating to changes to the organizational structure. And so I note we are adding 3 full-time equivalent positions. Housing Services Manager, which I think is a really important position and the city used to have many years ago. And when the gentleman that was in the position, he retired, and the decision was made to not refill that particular position. And I have to admit that I regret that, because of all of the efforts that we've been involved with housing, it would have been, I think, very helpful to have that position filled. So I'm looking forward to that one coming back. I see a senior planner for mobility, and we've had that conversation about the need to have someone focused like a laser beam on mobility issues. The utilities and maintenance worker, though, I'm not sure about that, because I know as a contract city, we have significant contracts with Excel and other maintenance contractors. And so maybe the city manager or someone could explain why in this particular case, we want to bring this person on as a staff member.
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that, and I'll ask our Interim Director of Public Works to lean into if he has some items that he would like to add to this. So we do have a contract for the cleanup along the rail trail on the pedestrian side of the walkway. And it is our Public Works staff that enter into the rail corridor and do the cleanup in the rail corridor piece. There's a significant amount of training, et cetera. We like to have a number of people do that. What we found with the previous cleanup schedule is that it just wasn't enough to keep up with the amount of trash and things that pile up. And so we've increased that. And then I'll also let the Public Works Director add to some of the other duties, because obviously we have some other things that this person is not going to be a full-time person, just helping us with cleanup on the rail trail.
Yes, thank you, Pam. Tim Desmira, Interim Public Works Director. good question. It's a combination of things, but really due to an increase in the amount of facilities that need to be maintained, as well as the rail right-of-way. Anticipating with the Leucadia streetscape, additional maintenance responsibilities, as well as supervision of increased contract services. And so what we found is it's a healthy blend of contract services supervised and overseen by our maintenance staff in coordination of those efforts. And so this particular individual would, as the city manager indicated, focus on the rail trail, street sweeping along bike trails, and also Leucadia streetscape when it's complete. So we do continue to move as we grow as an organization, do a blend of contract services and in-house, and keep a balance that we think is healthy in providing the supervision needed.
Okay, great. Yes, I got a text message from a friend who was disappointed with an overflowing trash can in downtown on Memorial Day weekend. I constantly hear from people who are a little bit upset because of the number of couches there are in the right of way. People tend to treat that as their dumping grounds. As I've been walking and biking more, it brings me up close and personal to a lot of the rubbish that's along the side of the road. So I applaud the effort to address those issues and recognize that there are other things that they will be doing, but the focus is really important. We are a city that I think most of us respect our community enough to not litter, but there are still way too many people that are willing to discard of their personal property in public space. So thank you for the efforts there. Meanwhile, City Manager, if you could talk a little bit about the restructuring of the organization and the current titles versus the revised titles, and how you think that's going to make your team more efficient and able to address the current needs of the city.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember or Deputy Mayor Kranz. So after being with the organization for several months and taking a look at some of the challenges and also the structuring, I would say that the primary change that I'm proposing is to have engineering infrastructure become its own department. It was at one time in years past. In addition, with the upcoming retirement of the assistant city manager and oversight of sustainability, we needed to have a home for that growing group, if you will. So what I am proposing is that our current Director of Development Services be the Director of Infrastructure and Sustainability, which I think will give a really good focus. We have a really robust program in infrastructure and capital projects and a growing need in sustainability. And then what we will do is eliminate our Assistant Director of Development Services, and that will now become the Director of Development Services. So those two individuals will become peers to one another and still work very closely. There's no movement in the in where people are sitting or the direction of keeping development services working together closely with engineering. In addition to that, we will be making some operational changes and some reclassifications of folks. From now, time to time, we take a look at the job duties that people are doing to make sure that they still match up with the job specs that they have been hired under. For example, we have engineering specialists that have now reached past their journey level and will now become engineer ones. And that's pretty traditional in that type of field, that you grow into those positions. That allows you to do different signages on plans and specs and things like that. We also will be taking one of our IT analysts and increasing the duties. As you have probably read in the paper, we have quite a few growing number of cyber attempted attacks. The city is no different. We've been able to thwart them thus far, but always good to have some additional knowledge and experience there. Our climate action plan administrator has really grown beyond the scope of the work that she's been doing, and will be taking on some new duties in sustainability. So we'll be reclassifying that as a sustainability manager. And then our department manager in risk and our director of human resources will both be taking on some new duties and responsibilities, and will become the administrative services director and the director of human resources and workers' compensation. There are several other ones that principal planners, planning managers, et cetera. But I'm proud to tell you that we've been able to make all of those changes for $127,000, which I think is a pretty good bargain for 12 or 13 position reclassifications.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I do appreciate the focus on sustainability and mobility. Those are really, really important. And then cleanliness, I think, goes hand in hand with the issue of sustainability and a focus on our environment. So I appreciate the efforts that you've made to analyze this. I think you've been here all coming up on a year, huh? Yes.
It's been 7 months. Although as people tell me, it seems like it's been longer, but yeah, it's been 7 months. But yeah, thank you very much.
Well, that's about the right time to get a sense of what you know, how you the adjustments that you need to make. So I appreciate all the efforts that have gone into that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'll call on Councilmember Lyons next, but I just want to also mention that you said you got all that accomplished for $127,000, but also with no increase in the FTE number, the full-time equivalent number. So that means our head count stays the same of employees. And that's also, you know, worth noting, because sometimes that can get lost in all of the detail. So
with the exception of the 3 positions that we did add, not in the reclassifications, Mayor, the mobility position, the public works maintenance worker, and the human services manager.
Okay, yes, thanks for clarifying that. Okay, Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you, Mayor Blakespear. I appreciate my colleagues' questions and the thorough answers. That was illuminating, and many of the things that I also was wondering about. The only additional question I have has to do with the specifics of one of the items mentioned in the budget, and it's the Pacific View funding. The amount that we are funding under our operations budget, I'm wondering if you could just give some more detail on what that is, how much it is.
On the feasibility study or the look of the...
Tom presented that the Pacific View funding was coming out of the operations budget. So I just wanted a characterization of what that includes and how much it is.
City Manager Antel, if I could respond, we have about $20,000 in annual maintenance expenditures. This budget does not include any of the rehabilitation work that we've been discussing until we get the final numbers.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, thank you. Did you have anything else, Councilmember Lyons?
No, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Hinsey.
Thank you. So I'm really excited about the mobility manager, and I just want to get a little bit more information about where they might live and the structure that we already have going. So I'm really interested in somebody that will help us coordinate our Safe Routes to School fund, make sure that we're maximizing the money that we have. Also doing some education partnerships with the school district. And I realize there's a constraint of, you know, who actually hires the trainers to do that, but you know, how will they be organizing that? And also, what will be their role with Traffic and Public Safety Commission? Will they be attending those meetings and taking part in that dialogue as well?
Thank you, Councilwoman Hinsey. Yes, the planner, senior planner mobility will live in development services, but have 1 foot in development services and 1 foot over in infrastructure, traffic, et cetera. And then if they had a third foot, it would be in connecting with our parks and recreation programs as well. As you are aware, mobility positions are really to be all inclusive and looking at the entire city and not just single focused in one area. So we're really looking for a very special individual, which is why we've requested that it be a senior planner, not an entry-level planner, who has the skills and not only being able to read plans, et cetera, but also be able to do the work from the perspective of working with engineers, as you had mentioned, in traffic, working with our youth groups and youth programs, and also the community at large, as well as be able to take a look at projects that are coming in as a part of the development services staff to make sure that we're not leaving any stone unturned in terms of opportunities for additional mobility enhancements. So it is a really special position, hard to find always the right fit. But there is a growing number of people that are involved and engaged in mobility, and we're hopeful that we will be able to find the perfect person to be able to serve in this multi-disciplined arena.
Yeah, that's really great. I know I'd hoped that it was somebody that was at least a part-time position, but having that full engineering background as well as some of the planning, I think will help us make sure that any new R30 projects that are coming on, we're really considering how to get people out of their car and walking around from their front door to the places that they want to go. So that's really great to hear. And then I remember from an earlier streetscape presentation, we'd mentioned that we were going to need to hire a temporary planner that was going to be specific to streetscape. So that's not included in any of these projections because we won't be doing that until we've got the loan and we have the money for the project itself.
So that is correct. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. I can ask the Director of Development Services to correct me. But when we bring forth the projected budget for the streetscape and the iBank loan, that will also indicate what is being accomplished in that, including the staffing for that project.
Okay, it looks like you answered fully, so Lillian didn't have to chime in. And then my last question here is about the Coastal Zone Management Fund. So I know that our TOT took a big hit this year, and I know that we fund our coastal management out of the TOT. And so I just want some confirmation that we're doing all our part with the local match to be able to continue moving forward our sand replenishment program that we had such a good federal commitment from in the last year.
Yes, we are, Councilmember Hensy. We're actively working with our lobbyists to ensure that the funding that comes from the state, which is what we use for our match for the federal projects, continues. And it looks like that is going to continue for the next couple of years. We had some good news just recently, and I'm going to be checking in with them tomorrow morning for some more information.
Those are all my questions.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to round two, I'm going to make a few comments myself, and I know we still need to get to the CIP here. So I just wanted to say that I am really grateful that what these three positions are that are being added, because I think when you think about the bread and butter of the city and what we need to do well and we need to excel at, it's housing, transportation, and maintenance. And I think that those are areas where we talk about it all these topics all the time, and we need to have adequate staff at the city to be able to fulfill the council's goals. So I'm really glad that the city manager has put this into the budget as something that we're doing to actualize those goals. I want to say on the utility and maintenance worker that it's great. I'm really, really grateful for that position, because I would like to move away from us having complaint-based trash cleanup, whether it's complaint from the mayor, which I feel happens, periodically, or Councilmember Cran's getting text messages, or just in general, people calling in to city council and saying, why are there these couches, and all that kind of complaining. And also the see-click fix type of complaints we get. So I'm really hopeful that this person will see it as their job to be proactive, so that it doesn't take somebody saying, hey, there's been like really a buildup of trash outside of the Santa Fe freeway entrance. Like why have we not cleaned that in 3 months or something, or 6 months or a year? So I assume that will be part of their job responsibilities, but it's important to note too, that we've created a lot of additional public space that people are using. So when we create a protected bike lane on Highway 101 and it needs to be swept of sand, and we create a coastal rail trail, and we're going to be creating Leucadia Streetscape with the first section under construction right now at El Portal. These are all places where people used to just drive through, and now they're using them. They're walking, they're biking, they're going there with their kids, and inevitably there's just more trash. So it's really important that we're nimble and on top of that. And I'm just really glad that we're not kind of continuing with the status quo and then expecting that things might improve, because really ultimately we just need to do a little bit more as a city to get on top of that. So I'm grateful to read this in the budget. Tim, I see you up here. Did you want to say something?
No, thank you. That's our goal, not just with the individual, but for the department as a whole, to be more proactive. Thank you for those comments.
Good. Well, that's great. I think that those were the main things that I wanted to say on this. There are some CIP things, but I'll hold those till we get to that point. So Councilmember Mosca.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just had a couple of follow-up items. One was just trying to kind of imagine how with the organizational change, which I support, because it really aligns us better with our strategic planning goals and allows us to kind of really meet those goals much more effectively. And so I applaud the city manager and staff for coming up with these changes. Just trying to imagine how the changes are going to happen regarding the development services group. Because, it used to be that engineering and planning was separate, but then we felt like that they were kind of in silos and we kind of joined them up. And so with this change, we're not separating them. They're still going to be under Director Sapato as development services. So he would basically oversee both planning and engineers. And then there were going to be special engineers that are assigned to special infrastructure projects, and then sustainability under Director Doherty.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Mosca. So we do have some engineering staff that reports directly through development services and what I like to refer to as the planning community development side. What we found was that from the director perspective, in terms of oversight and management, with the robust nature of the infrastructure CIP side, that we were always focused on one and then missing something on the other. And so what I think I'm really trying to convey to all of you is that there needs to be coordination between engineering, public works, planning, CIP all the time. When engineering was under public works, sometimes the development services or planning side would feel like they got short shrift, if you will. When it moved over into planning and development services, sometimes there's a disconnect between public works and engineering. What we're trying to do is recognize that it's really not so much about which department it's under, but rather that the communication stays open and we provide opportunities to do that. In the meantime, it was a really, really big department to oversee all of those pieces, especially right now in the development services side, where we have so many of the housing element sites coming forward. So I made a commitment to the engineering staff that we wouldn't keep moving them around from building to building, et cetera. But I do think that it's very much supported by the engineering folks, that they are once again their own department, if you will. But we do have some engineering staff that will remain on the planning and development services side.
No, that sounds, that makes a lot of sense. And now let's take it a step further and talk about sustainability. There are always folks that were concerned that there's a centralization of sustainability, and that it's at the higher level and it's not kind of coming down to the organization. How are we going to do the same thing with sustainability? How are we going to make sure that it's touching every part of our organization?
Right. And, I would say I want to compliment Assistant City Manager Mark DeLynn, who's going to be retiring in July, who did a fantastic job of really creating the sustainability program, if you will, and bringing together climate and our beach restoration, et cetera. With the adoption of community choice energy and some of the work that we're doing to broaden the climate action plan goals, it really became apparent that we are no longer a study research group. We're now an active working group, and we need to have those voices at the table, in particular with our infrastructure and CIP projects, much like we just talked about with the mobility planner, that the far-reaching, for example, when we talked about streetscape and borrowing, we really needed to have our climate action plan administrator a part of that discussion. When we're looking at landscaping, when we're talking about water conservation, et cetera. So the idea that it's moving with infrastructure and sustainability should not be seen as a lessening of the focus on climate action and sustainability, but more that we are now having all of the folks in that group engage. They already sit with the engineers and planners on the development services side. So the camaraderie and the work and the communication is good. This just more formalizes that relationship.
That sounds really good to me. And I like this alignment. And I do want to also echo what you said about Mark DeLynn, just really grateful for his service to our city. I know there's going to be another time for us to really kind of show our love for Mark and everything that he's done for our city. So I look forward to that moment when we can, I see him online, just to kind of really let him know how thankful we are for his service to our city. And I really do like this alignment. And as you say, as we kind of going toward implementation, it has to be about really making sure that every part of our organization is really looking at this, sustainability through that kind of looking at the actions that we're taking, even if it's not about climate action plan, but how can, you see this through that lens and make sure that the actions that we're taking are consistent with that, the policies that we have.
One of the things that I've heard, I think you've heard me starting to say more and more, is we're one city, one team. And so we're really trying to, yes, you may have a reporting structure and Lillian is at the top of that structure or Mark is at the top of that structure, but we really are trying very hard for people to think about breaking down those barriers and those silos. And I think that the staff has done a fantastic job of doing that throughout this year in particular, because there were so many challenges with communication and not always being in the same room. So I'm really excited about these changes. And the thing that I think is really important for people to see is that when we make a change in the organization, it shouldn't be thought of as a negative thing or something was done wrong or the work isn't getting done, but we're changing as the world around us are changing. And so what we're proposing today is really what the organization needs today. That doesn't mean that 3 years down the line or some other city manager down the line won't make another change that'll be appropriate for that time. So.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Let's move to the CIP part. And so we'll take the staff report and then the public comments and then council.
I think are they not separate agenda items that need different motions?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think it's just receive and file.
Okay.
So I would, it doesn't need to be approved. We're proposing.
Yeah, the budget comes back the next meeting or so.
Got it. Do we want a motion or no?
I don't think we need a motion unless we were making changes.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay, so go ahead, Tom, or whomever in Tom Gallup's room is speaking.
Yes. Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and Council members. This is Teresa McBroom, the Director of Finance, and I'm pleased to present the 6-year CIP plan and proposed 2-year CIP budget. This is a brief overview of how the CIP plan and budget was created. So as you know, there were 2 strategic sessions held on April 14th and May 3rd, and that's where staff presented the revenue forecast, recommended the general fund, CIP, and work projects. And then based on Council's prioritization of the future phases of the Leucadia Streetscape project, staff presented information on debt financing through a loan with iBank limited to $20 million with a 15-year payoff term. Like Assistant Director Gallup showed, there has been some work. We worked on the budget in brief. Staff worked very hard on that, and there is a CIP portion to that too. So this first slide is the 6 years combined of CIP. And just a reminder, it is a CIP plan for the future years, and those future years are not funded until each subsequent budget adoption. So 6 years of additional funding for CIP came to $86.6 million. And it's made up mainly of streets and rail corridor for $46.2 million, or 53%. And that's followed by the wastewater funds for $16.2 million, or 19% of total CIP, and then mobility improvements for 8%. This slide shows the proposed CIP by funding source. So the orange bar again represents the loan proceeds from the debt financing. And again, this is just a placeholder in the budget until the project is approved when staff returns for your approval of the project. So you see that in orange. The blue bars on the bottom represent the general fund portion. And then you'll see the yellow and the gray bars that I think they make a substantial contribution to the CIP plan. That's the Transnet Fund and the Gas Tax Fund towards our street overlay project. And then the dark blue bar is the wastewater project. And then here's a look at the proposed CIP plan for the first 2 years. So fiscal year 2021-22, we're proposing $35.5 million. And the streets and rail corridor projects make up 71% of CIP in that year, followed by mobility improvements of 10%, and then wastewater is 8%. And then in the second year, we're proposing $12.2 million in CIP projects, and that's made up of the streets and rail corridor projects of 36%, followed by wastewater at 26%, and then parks and beaches at 11%. So I wanted to go really quickly and show you how we arrived at the proposed $35.5 million in the first year and then $12.2 million in the second year. So during the council strategic session, what was presented on May 3rd was $4.6 million and $3.8 million. And those were the proposed general fund projects. During the May 3rd session, council requested that the North Leucadia rail grade separated crossing project be removed. So that was taken off in the first year. And then again, we've got the placeholder for the Leucadia Streetscape project of $20 million. And this proposed budget includes all the other non-general fund funds, such as wastewater, grant funding, and mitigation funds. I'm going to go over the next few slides really quickly because you've seen this before during the strategic session. So general fund projects are made up of the annual CIP, the new CIP, and the tiered CIP. They total $4.2 million in the first year and $3.8 million in the second year. And then these are the annual projects that council funds annually that are generally the same amount every year. These are the new projects that we proposed, and they were prioritized due to grant funding, emergency repairs, safety reasons, or required regulatory reasons. And then these are the projects that were prioritized based on the tiered list that we started 2 years ago. So that totals $1.2 million in year one and $1.8 million in year two. This is a little bit more detail on the other funds that are not general funds. So you can see the annual street overlay project is funded at $3.6 million in year one and then $3.7 million in year two. And that's mainly from the gas tax and the transnet funds. The wastewater capital projects are funded by the ratepayers in the Encinitas Sanitation District and the Cardiff Sanitation District. And then we've got a number of grants that are coming forward with the citywide leading pedestrian intervals being the highest at $1.2 million. So that totals $31.3 million in the first year and then $8.4 million in the second year. Before we ended, I wanted to show you the, can you click on that, please? I wanted to show you the CIP portion of the OpenGov portal. So when you look at this list of projects over the next 6 years, the important thing to know is right now it's showing by project type. And over here on the right, if you highlight Parks and Rec, you can see the bars changing. Over on the left, here's consultant studies, here's drainage, here's Parks and Rec and beaches, facilities. But there's this little arrow here kind of in the middle, and you can sort by funding source. It'll change. And then you can see all the funds and what projects support that. And there's a table down below, just like Assistant Director Gallup showed you previously. So that's something we worked on that I wanted to show you. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear the two public speakers and then we'll go to council.
Our first public speaker is Mary Ann Penton. Mary Ann, you can start when ready. And then Kieran, if you could put up her PowerPoints when she's ready for those.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Mary Ann. And just let us know when you want the slides up.
Let's put them up right now. We'll make this very quick and direct.
Great, thank you.
Okay. First of all, great presentation, you guys. The new city manager is doing a great job. I'm really impressed listening to the the direction that she's putting us. It's a great thing. So I represent now Leucadia. We're a group in Northwest Leucadia. If you go to the next slide, please. This will be really fast. The goal of our group is safe rail crossings in Northwest Leucadia. Our goal really is safety, pedestrian, bike, and traffic safety in our part of the community, which is separate from streetscape. It may be misunderstood that we are completely separate from streetscape. Why do we advocate for a safe rail crossing in Northwest Leucadia? Why is it so important? Because if you want to go to the next slide, please. We're asking to maintain the $400,000 that was recently taken out of the CIP budget for the North Leucadia Rail. We request that you create a tier 1 allocation for the North Leucadia rail crossing, and to combine the $250,000 designated rail study for at-grade crossing and the $400,000 budget for the grade separated crossing, because it's one item. And I know in the past the at-grade rail crossing was not a good idea. However, as the city manager said, that things change, And we believe that this is now a new climate for reinvesting in the at grade, but without completely eliminating the option of the under street crossing. So it's really important to keep that $400,000 available so we can pivot quickly. It's very important, I think, to the entire city, because Northwest Leucadia is not just for our local residents. It's also a high density area for people coming from within other parts of Encinitas and also tourists, and also the south end of Carlsbad. So there, as you know, there's so much going on. Anyways, we want to have the option to explore the at-grade crossing, but also pivot quickly to go to other options. And it's the goal, as it is with the city, to have shovel-ready projects for federal or state funding as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, our goal is to prioritize public safety-related capital improvement projects in Northwest Leucadia. The corridor with increasingly unsafe mobility option, the corridor with the most development in the entire city, the corridor with the highest density of population on both sides of the train tracks. For so many reasons, we ask that you keep that $400,000 in the budget for our North Leucadia needs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marianne. And then our next speaker is Rob Fleener. Rob, you can start when ready. You have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. Thank you for listening to me ask again for money for a safe rail crossing in Northwest Leucadia. I'm asking that the $250,000 designated for the at-grade study and the $400,000 marked for the separated crossings be combined into one fund called the Northwest Leucadia Safe Rail Crossing Fund. Hopefully this fund would keep us on track to get a design funded, be shovel ready, and move us up the ladder for finding grant monies. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And Mayor, that does conclude speakers on this item.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll just jump in since I don't see any hands up yet. So I think to be responsive to the 2 speakers, I think it's important to recall that the reason that we chose one option, either we're studying an at-grade option or we're studying the grade separated option, is because in order to get approval for at-grade, you need to prove that it's not feasible in various ways to do an undercrossing. And so pursuing the creation of a study that shows that you could do the undercrossing doesn't help you get the at-grade crossing. And I think it's also important that we're utilizing our city resources well. So basically having 400,000 just sitting there as we wait to see what happens with the other study is just not a good use of city resources. So, you know, this was much discussed at a previous meeting. You know, my feeling was that I wanted to have some deference to my council colleague, Councilmember Kranz, who seems to think that an at-grade crossing is feasible. You know, I don't have information that indicates that's possible, but I also think it's important that we not park money just to sit there or spend money in alternatives to design alternatives when both of them are not going to be possible and one might preclude the other. So just, you know, speaking, I know we've received a lot of emails about this. I know there's a desire to move forward, but I think the reality of what it means to move forward is that the 400,000 for the grade separated crossing was to actually go out and find a firm that could do an analysis of where specifically it would be and to move that ball forward. So if we're not moving that ball forward, we're reconsidering, do we want it at grade across or do we want it under? You know, that decision has to be made first. So on Councilmember Kranz's, Deputy Mayor Kranz's urging, this council decided to do the rail safety study for $250,000. So I do continue to stand by that decision as being the right one, given our responsibility to manage all parts of the city and to utilize our city resources wisely and to not jeopardize the at-grade study's possible success. So I'll just want to say that up front. I know that this is disappointing to some people in this part of the city who would like us to set money aside and have it sit there, but that's just not the way that we are doing the budgeting. And there's substantial investments that are going into Leucadia right now with Leucadia Streetscape, and our plan to borrow $20 million for that corridor, and then a number of other things happening on Vulcan. So I do feel that we are being very responsive to the needs of that part of the city and recognizing that it's never enough, and that it's frustrating that we can't solve people's problems and the mobility problems much more efficiently or cheaply or quickly. But I do feel that we are doing everything we can and are very much focused on this part of the city. I'll also just mention as part of my comments, so the way the budget was just presented was, this really tall graph in this next fiscal year of $20 million. And I just wanted to understand from the finance department of the city manager, are we borrowing that money like right now, even if we don't have coastal commission approval and et cetera, right of way not resolved, like some of these things that are outstanding? What is the actual timing plan for the $20 million borrowing?
So, Madam Mayor, we will be bringing back on the June 23rd, along with in fact, we're going to ask for a 4 p.m. special start time to talk about streetscape and the $20 million. And there is a little bit of the iBank will help us with the funding timing, if you will. So after you approve that, we will move forward with the documents to apply for the loan, provide all of the documentation that they need for that. And then we will be moving forward with bidding, et cetera. So there's some logistics that need to happen, but we won't borrow the money tomorrow. It will be during the summer, we will be filling out all of the applications. And I'll ask Finance Director Teresa McBroom to pop in as well. I know we also have a concern that we don't want to miss the window of opportunity on the low interest rate right now. And so perhaps you can shed a little bit of light on that as well, Teresa.
Yes, thank you. So once we get the information that we need and we know the timing of when the expenditures will go out, there's an opportunity to also ask for the money they're called tranches, but you can think of it as stages, just so that we can we start getting charged for interest right away, and we don't want to be charged for the interest or the portion that we're not using right away. So once we get a better sense of what the project is and the timing, then iBank will help us, and they'll approve the whole amount, and then we can take them out in tranches. So
when you say approve the whole amount, does that mean that our budget is, the budget is showing a $20 million graph. So does it approve the whole amount, but take it out in tranches? Like what year is it hitting our budget?
It's in the first year, but we're doing that as a placeholder. It can be adjusted once we know we have a better indication of the timing of the project.
Okay. Yeah, I want to make sure that we're really consciously making this decision so that it reduces costs and that we don't find ourselves in some ridiculous situation where we don't get a ministerial approval and we don't get right of way resolved, and we've borrowed $20 million that we're paying on, and like just that we have the best and brightest focused on this part. And can I just get a little assurance about that?
Yes. We are hopeful for the same thing, Madam Mayor. Yeah, it is. The iBank, what's really great about the iBank is they are used to this drill, that cities are borrowing this money for capital projects. Some of them are coastal cities like us that need to get all of our final approvals and need to go out to bid, et cetera. So we will get some assistance that way. But yeah, we're not going to take out the money tomorrow and start paying next week, and then no project is had for 3 years or something like that. And we will certainly be keeping the council informed as we go through that process. We're at this stage or this phase. Now we're at this one. Here's what's happening with Coastal Commission, et cetera. This won't be the last that you hear from us on the timing of this.
Okay. Another comment is that I'm curious about why we present things in the budget as putting together streets and rail and then mobility. Because, there's a large section of our city that is not in the rail corridor. Like a lot of people who live east of El Camino Real who are not in the rail corridor. So when we're looking at our budget, to me, it would make more sense to put mobility and streets together, because mobility, and then rail, like rail improvement projects. So, and I just wonder if you could address that, because when I'm looking at the budget, I find it hard when you say the second largest category is mobility. I'm not distinguishing what that's even meaning from streets and rail.
Finance Director McBroom, is that the categories that the city has typically used? We can certainly change. I like change, so we're happy to change something. Is this just kind of the old categories that the city has used since the dawn of time, or?
Yes, these were established before I came here 3 years ago.
Okay.
But my understanding of mobility is it includes walkability and also, pedestrian, and then also bicycle. So I think that's the distinction.
Sorry, excuse me. I don't mean to interrupt you. Sorry, you can finish. Go ahead.
I didn't have much. I was just saying that was a distinction. The mobility included pedestrian and then bicycle.
Right. Yeah, I assume that mobility includes that. But the point is that streets should also include that. Mm-hmm. And I hope that this isn't, and what I fear is that, and we hear this criticism that like the city restripes things without improving mobility, or doesn't look to the mobility plan as it does various things with bike lanes, or, so the merging of mobility and streets, like in a budget way, but also in an operations way, which, I assume is happening all the time, but I'm sometimes wondering that. So I really wanted us to think about how to present this in the budget. So it is clear. It's clear to me that we spend the vast majority of our money on mobility projects in general, which is streets, rail, and mobility. But to have that presented in such a way that that's also really clear in the budget, and not having the rail mixed in with streets, to me, that would make a lot more sense. So yeah. I hope that you consider that change for the future.
That sounds like a fantastic idea.
Okay, and then another thing that I noticed is that in the budget binder that we received has the unfunded projects at the end, and one project that continues to not show up, and I just want to air this, which I said at the last budget meeting, or maybe it's here and I missed it, but is the quiet corridor. So the quiet rail corridor, like end to end, is something that has been much discussed and periodically becomes intensely complained about, depending on, I think, whether the train horn engineer at that time happens to be really aggressive at night. But, we periodically do have a lot of dialogue about this, and we had talked about it, and at one point had costed it, and I don't see it anywhere in our budget at all now. And so does anybody know like where that went or why it's not showing up anymore?
It is a tier 3 project. It's not a new unfunded project that came along for this budget period, and that's why it wasn't included. These are the new unfunded projects. I'm happy to add them for you if you'd like, though. That would not be a problem.
It goes back to this point that was made at the last council meeting, which is that I think we just need to be able to get our arms around everything we're doing, and to have it show up year to year, and to have each budget put in the context of multiple year budgets, so that we can see where we've been, where we are, what remains. And some of these things, I appreciate having an unfunded grouping, like there are certain things basically like on all of our road corridors that are unfunded. Lucadia Streetscape shows up on unfunded for 47 million, and it's, that's 47 million in this year. It's the one project that doesn't get escalated in cost over 6 years. Like all the other unfunded projects are escalating in cost, which is good, because I think that's realistic. I think we'd ask for that, and that's responsive. But just to really be able to track things like how much is remaining if we do 20 million, or what the accuracy of this, I think, and the completeness of it, I think, is important, so that it goes to this earlier question about having like a committee, blue ribbon infrastructure committee that looks at all of our needs. because when we have, projects that are somehow not showing up, then it's really hard to get our arms around all of it. And so I know we can have the feeling of like, oh, it seems like we're not doing as much as we want to be doing, and we feel like we're falling down, over promising, under delivering, which we never want to do. But I just think for the sake of transparency and being able to make a difference in future years, it really needs to show up in these budget documents, especially because this looks out 6 years. I mean, we're required legally to look out 6 years, so we should really be doing that. So I think, those are my kind of initial comments. And so I appreciate everything that's in here, and I look forward. I just want to also just kind of footnote that this is not the streetscape discussion. So, we've had I have had a lot of staff discussion about streetscape since our last meeting, where we figured out that the plan at that time didn't include a bike lane, but staff, has looked at the information again and is redesigning things. So it will include a bike lane, but what does it include, and when are we going to be able to put certain things in, and how quickly can we move forward? And a lot of those details, I think we're not talking about tonight, but we will be talking about. And I just want to footnote that to say, and maybe the city manager can just confirm this, that we will have a full council meeting to discuss this, so that we're really clear on what the 20 million is funding and what the current street striping it would be funding, and how we're going to be able to achieve these mobility goals of streetscape in the most efficient way possible.
Yes, Madam Mayor, the streetscape will come back as a special meeting, 4 p.m. Or 4:30. I will double check, 4 or 4:30 on June 23rd, ahead of your regular council meeting.
Okay, great. So with that, I will call on my colleagues. Council Member Mosca.
I'm gonna get off mute here. Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. This is such an important part of our budget, the capital improvement program. A lot of residents really, this is where, the rubber hits the road, where people really see the improvements happening in our community. So it's so important to discuss this and make sure it's not only understandable to us, but it also makes sense in terms of our strategic priorities. I appreciate the mayor's comments in terms of mobility and how that's reflected. I think that with our alignment or new alignment that the city manager has proposed, I think that that's excellent, and that allows us to really focus on our projects and have them delivered. But here, I think we need to make sure we're communicating properly about what we are doing to the public and all the different forms that we do communicate. So I think that it's important to kind of take to heart what the mayor was talking about in terms of how we reflect mobility. I also think that the back and forth between the mayor and staff on financing of streetscape was important as well. And just wanted to understand, what are the trigger points? I was just kind of feeling a bit insecure. What are the trigger points? I guess I understand that there's a bit of kind of fuzziness. It's not black and white, and I'm cool with that. As an attorney, I've been trained to kind of live in the gray a little bit. But I think that just trying to understand, so we'll talk to the finance folks and say, how long does it take, from application to funding? And I like what Director McBroom was talking about in terms of tranches. That makes a lot of sense. How long will it take from filling out the first form to funding approximately? And then how long is it going to take to go through working with the staff of the Coastal Commission? How long is it going to take to go through that process? Just trying to line it up so that we are not in a situation, where we're looking at funding and we don't actually have commitment to a project. And so just kind of wanted to flesh out a little bit more what the trigger points are for the staff in terms of, just kind of signing on the dotted line and becoming funded.
So I'm going to request, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Mosca, that you please let us have until our meeting on the 23rd to pull together all of it. We weren't prepared to talk about all those details tonight, so
yeah, you're right. You're right.
Just a little bit more time.
Right.
We'll
Certainly the trigger point isn't tonight. So no, absolutely. All right. No, that's that fair point. And I didn't mean to put you guys on the spot, but you'll come back on the 23rd. So I saw that and I was just kind of, oh my gosh. All right. So the one other point that I wanted to kind of just drill down on is in terms of facilities, we spent a lot of money in the past on some of our facilities vis-a-vis bond money, and we've inherited facilities that, like our city hall, which is fairly old, and I know that we've been putting some money into it. So just wanted to kind of explore with you guys, do we have plans together for the for the improvement of these facilities? Because 2 to 3% seems kind of low to me, and I don't even think that accurately kind of reflects what we've been putting into the city hall so far. I think we've put in just during the pandemic about $1 million just in the council chambers, and we have some other things that we're spending. So, do we have plans for the improvement of the facilities and to keep them up? And are there other accounts that are not reflected in this pie chart, which shows kind of a 2 to 4% range for the next year or two?
So the councils of the past had the fortitude to think, foresight to think down the road and have budgeted, correct me if I'm wrong, Teresa, about $1.1 million a year for 1.1?
Yes, that's correct.
For city facilities. And I'll just make one correction. We did phase 1 of City Hall. We didn't spend $1 million on the council chambers. We spent $1 million on quite a few asbestos remediation, new carpeting, the council chambers, and several other pieces of it. And I will ask Director Jennifer Campbell to come on and talk a little bit, and also Public Works Director Desmira, to talk just a little bit about where we're at on the City Hall Phase 2, which is our next component that we'll be working on. Either one of you. Bueller?
I should be there.
There you are.
Okay, good. I was going to say. Thank you very much, City Manager Anto. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. Yeah, we are right now embarking on phase 2 for City Hall renovation. Currently, the plans are in. So some of the overview of that is to change some of the signage around City Hall. It's also to paint and do different repairs. It's also to work on parking lot restriping. It's also looking at putting EV chargers as well for city vehicles. And it's looking for better wayfinding and kiosks, as well as lighting and landscaping. So currently, the architects are pretty much done with the plans. We do have to submit through development services to get those approved. So we're hoping to get all that done over summer and to hopefully bring back a bid package for council to go ahead and do in the fall. And then once that work is bid out and we get the construction cost, we can then move forward with the City Hall phase 2 renovations.
Thank you, Director Campbell. Thank you, City Manager, for correcting me. Yes,
yeah,
we didn't spend $1 million.
I wouldn't want you to go away thinking, leaving everybody like, what, $1 million? I also want to add to what Director
Joe has a really nice chair in the City Council chambers.
and Public Works Director Desmira may want to add to this. There are also some of that Ms. Campbell described are some of the working in aesthetics and restriping. We also have some roof repairs and facade repairs that we need to do. And I didn't know if one or the other of you wanted to talk a little bit about that. So it's not just the look and feel of City Hall, but we legitimately have some roof and leaking issues. So
I'm happy to jump in, Jennifer.
Thank you.
So yes, it is everything exterior. So everything that was not included in phase 1 is included in phase 2, which does include not only re-roof, but also the roof panels, if you will, that you see upon entry, but a total repair of the exterior of the facility to bring up what needed maintenance, long ignored maintenance on the facility.
So just kind of to that point, I guess my larger point was in terms of that kind of long deferred maintenance. I'm not aware of like plans that we're doing. I don't want to be in a situation where we're deferring maintenance, long deferred maintenance. Like for instance, I ride my bike by like the Village Park Fire Station. It's kind of a Texture 111 type of material building that it's made of, which doesn't stand up for a long period of time, and it looks like it needs some help. And I know that the Levenheim Fire Station, which we don't own, is kind of a temporary situation, and that we're looking more long-term. And so just kind of wanted to, larger, broader kind of question is, are we doing planning in terms of making sure that we're keeping up with the maintenance of these facilities, and that we're basically programming money for the maintenance of these facilities, and we're thinking down the line of even a replacement of these facilities, such as even in Levenheim, where the fire station is a temporary fire station. It was always a temporary fire depot. And how are we approaching that issue?
So I would say that the facilities question is one that we could always do quite a bit more. We feel very fortunate that the council provides $1 million each year for us to keep up with facilities, but there is always more that we could do. I can't answer the question right now about the fire station that we're leasing in Levenheim, but there are always more things that we could do. And what we try to do is just keep them on a list and hit the ones that are most in need. But you raise a very good question. It probably is time for us to do a better analysis of all of our facilities, take a look at all of the roofs, all of the windows, et cetera. And I don't know, I would have to check. I don't know how long it's been since we've done something like that to even see what our infrastructure backlog is, but could certainly be a part of the infrastructure blue ribbon committee work that we could bring back.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Kranz.
Yes, thank you. I want to be clear to the public that there's no actions that we've taken so far that are going to allow us to borrow the $20 million. And in fact, the trigger on that will be our vote to borrow that money. And so my expectation is that the city manager will have a beefy staff report that tells us all the details and gives us the ability to make an informed decision. So I look forward to that. And included in that will be the timing of, first of all, have we put the job out for bid to know what we're going to be able to get, how much we need to borrow. 20 million is kind of the budget item, but maybe it comes in less expensive than that. So therefore we don't need to borrow it all. If we're going to borrow 20 million, maybe we want to identify some other infrastructure projects. I don't know that that's smart, but my hope is that we have some bid documents that have additive alternatives that we can continue to fund, do the construction on streetscape. And the other thing that I feel compelled to say is the meeting we last had about this particular issue, there was this confusion over whether there was a class 2 bike lane from Lacoste Avenue to Encinitas Boulevard. And the plans have always had that in them, and they didn't change, but there was this conversation about the phasing and what was going to happen to the phase that we weren't going to build. And there was some answers from staff that I think perhaps they would like to take back and answer differently if they could, but it created some confusion. And I want to make sure the public knows that the important mobility facilities that were always a part of streetscape never were removed from that project. So I do think that that's something that I want to make sure we convey to the public. Speaking of semantics, one of the things I see in the pie charts is this term drainage. And I think that means stormwater facilities. And I would ask that it be changed to be stormwater, because the word water is the key part of that word. And water is like gold, whether it's black gold through the sewer system, or brown gold through the stormwater system, or potable. It's gold, and we need to make sure that we identify those times that we are expending public money on addressing water issues, whether they be stormwater sewer water or potable water. So I hope we can make that change. And then I was a little disappointed in the $250,000 in that pie chart. I'm a little surprised about that because it seems to me there are other more significant projects that should increase that number. In fact, in your staff report, it identifies $1.2 million as part of the project. So, you know, I'm not sure what happened to the pie, but I would ask that you take a look at that and see if it might be adjusted. I disagree with the mayor. I think that we should indeed change the phraseology of the money that we're allocating for cross connections in North Leucadia and keep the $400,000 in that budget item, because we're going to, no matter what, it's going to be millions of dollars in design, at least on some solution or another. And I think it's important that we make that commitment. And whether that $400,000 sits in the general fund excess pot or more appropriately allocated to addressing the cross connection issues, I think we would be better if we left it where it is and changed the phraseology on the project itself to cross connection and not get into the details about what type of cross connection it's going to be. I think that the community deserves that commitment, and that we should leave that $400,000 budgeted for cross connection. It wasn't something that I thought was worth pursuing last meeting. I regret that. I guess it would have been better to make that point back then, but in retrospect, I think that changing the name from grade separated versus at grade to cross connect is a better approach in my opinion. I do have some questions about the staff report and the way we are in some of these things. I don't know if you have the ability to bring up page 78 of the staff report.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you. So this is a project that has been on the books for a while, CS11C, and I see that prior appropriations for this is 1.475 million for construction, and it appears that 1.2875 of that came from traffic mitigation fees. Is that correct? And am I describing this correctly?
Yes, that's correct. Previous appropriations were from the Traffic Mitigation Fund. Those amounts are being changed to be used by the regular Traffic Mitigation Fund. And this is a project that I believe Director Doherty can respond about.
Well, I think the most important thing that I want to be sure that we have $1.475 million available for pursuing solutions to the mobility issues that are vexing Northwest Leucadia from Highway 101 to I-5 at the very least. So this would be great news. I don't ever recall seeing this. I have not gone back and done the, figure out how it was that there was $1,475,000 sitting there. That's never come up.
I don't believe that there's $1.4 million left. I think there have been projects through the years that have been done. And I don't know when this particular sheet was done. They're, outdated almost the day that they're given to the finance folks. But perhaps Lillian could jump on and talk a little bit about what we have done with this fund and the balance.
Good afternoon. Yes, thank you, City Manager Antle. So this fund was the source of some discussion, actually a last council meeting when we discussed the La Costa signal and all-way stop control. Some of these funds were proposed to be utilized for the improvements proposed along La Costa, to include the DG walkway that was to be funded as a separate item. So some of those funds will be used there. At this time, my recollection is that the amount available in this fund is just shy of $1.2 million.
Just shy of 1.2. Why is that not reflected in this? It says 1.299578, so roughly $1.3 million.
So some of the funds was being proposed to be used for some of the improvements on La Costa, to include the walkway and the design of the walkway and the design of the signal that was brought forth at the last city council meeting.
So, and at the last city council meeting, we agreed that we weren't going to move forward with those things. So in reality, it's still 1.3 roughly. And there is, there are these possible projects pending, but we can essentially come up with a strategy that would enhance mobility in that area, make people safer, and possibly cost up to $1.3 million, and maybe build retaining walls that are necessary to extend the walkway further towards Sheridan, or getting it closer to where the Weston property is going to be developed, or something along those lines. Am I reading this correctly? So in other words, that's how much money we can solve this problem on La Costa Avenue for, unless we draw on the general fund.
So I believe there are certain restrictions associated with traffic mitigation funds. So I would need to do a little bit more research with respect to whether it could be used for a walkway. Perhaps Director McBroom could speak to that. But the other mention that I would have is, it would also be helpful to provide a full breakdown on how much available funds are in this account currently. As City Manager Antle indicated, these sheets are developed at a point in time, and as we were moving forward with the all-way stop control and the design and approval of the walkway, and these funds were recommended to be allocated toward that effort. And so determining how much is currently available to that may be allocated, I think would be very helpful for this council.
Okay, well, and we haven't, nobody has spent anything on that area. So I think, this is a good ballpark, but I think it's important that not only the council members know, but the public knows what resources are available to address this, the issues that are currently impacting many lives in that area. So this is encouraging. Thank you for that. Tom, if you could put it on page 111 of the staff report, I would appreciate it. Okay, thank you. This is a mobility improvement project, Leucadia Boulevard Roundabout at Hygeia, and it's listed as unfunded, but I wanted to clarify that we currently have $3.3 million funding there. It's identified that there is a shortage apparently of $2 million, so a total project cost of $5.5 million. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
So those
This project is
3.371 million are there and they're available. If we took some of the appurtenances away and maybe didn't spend the same amount of money for the walkway between Fulvia and Hymettus, perhaps there are ways that we could get this down so that it wasn't a $5.5 million project.
I am happy to answer, Councilmember or Deputy Mayor Kranz. The answer is yes. So approximately between $600,000 and $800,000 is for a sidewalk and a retaining wall. It would require additional funds to be utilized for a redesign of this project. I am also aware, in looking more closely at the engineering, that there are funds. Some of the reason for the increase in construction cost is also the extensive drainage that is required at this location due to the grade. So I do just want to highlight that there are construction and engineering reasons why this particular roundabout is on the higher end of the roundabout spectrum with respect to cost.
Well, I think that it would be good to dive into this a little deeper because that's a roundabout that is way more expensive than any of the other ones. So it might be worth revisiting. Lord knows the last thing I want to do is have two roundabouts with an all-way stop in the middle of it. It has been 15 years since this project was designed, but I think it's important that we understand that, we got to come up with another $2 million for what would be a total $5.5 million roundabout project. And so it would be, I think, really important to make sure that we have a good, deep knowledge of exactly what we're spending here for this one roundabout, the missing roundabout. The other question that I have is that I know that I've been told that there are issues related to utility relocations for this project. And I don't know if there's any way to do some of those relocations without actually constructing the roundabout. But I would like to, start getting creative to figure out how we can get this in. This is a whole bunch of money sitting there waiting for another whole bunch of money to be able to fund it. So it would be my hope that we could, as a council, get another look at this and what has caused it to essentially double in price. So, but again, I think that for me, it's important to be able to identify that this is a project that is not unfunded, it's partially funded, and it's partially funded to a significant amount of money. And so let's take a look at ways that we can get some decisions made so that we're not tying up resources when it's going to be really difficult to get that done. And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to call on the other two council members, but I don't want to leave this roundabout yet because I do think this is a good example of where the project, the issue of like, what is the main goal of that project? And then how do we value engineer it and build it? I mean, my recollection of what happened with this is that it's partly delayed because of, when you said it's related to drainage, I think that's partly also describing right-of-way, isn't it? Right-of-way acquisition for the sidewalk that we are still negotiating.
Thank you, Mayor. So there are two acquisitions that are moving forward. One acquisition is in escrow. So you are correct, we are moving forward. And one is an acquisition that we should have a vote from the a homeowners association later this month. We do not foresee any issues, but it has taken an extended amount of time to negotiate those two acquisitions.
Right. So I'm saying this out loud just as a reminder that when we have projects that get into the CIP queue and we all say that they're important, it's the third roundabout on Leucadia Boulevard, we should do it. We have said yes to this project in multiple budgets in the past. And then there are these roadblocks, and unless there's like really bird dogging this, you know, every week from somebody, it just seems to fall into kind of a less than urgent status, and other urgent things take the place of staff time and attention or council time and attention. And so, you know, this roundabout, if it was, I mean, if it was 3.3 million, which I actually recall it being closer to 2 million, but we didn't quite have the last pieces worked out. And, you know, there was the sidewalk that wasn't quite finished and we needed the right of way. But like, how do we get ourselves into a process where we don't fall into like this longer delay? And I think, I mean, this is my fear about streetscape and my hope about not having that happen. But the reality that streetscape is even more complex than one roundabout on a city street that does not need coastal commission approval, and does not have controversy. So we don't have, you know, multiple groups or people who are opposed to this roundabout, and we're kind of still unable to make it across that finish line. So, you know, I just really want to emphasize that as a council, as a staff, that I would like to resolve, like Councilmember Cran said, I'd like to resolve this roundabout. Like, let's figure out what is it that would be the critical path to get this done, and so that we have the right of way we need, and we figure out. I mean, it looks like from this chart that we have 3.3 million sitting there. So that's that same kind of thing about having money sitting in other funds that's not being used, and we can't come up with that last several million. So thinking about, if we're not going to fund, we should fund it. If we're not going to fund it, we should use that money to fund something else we are going to build. And I guess that's just really what I come back to, is like, let's do stuff with our money. Let's make sure that we're utilizing it well. So I see the city manager popped on with her hand up. Would you like to respond to that? We can't hear you. City manager, we can't hear you.
There we go. One more week. One more week on the Zoom, right? In theory. So this is one of the things that I think is the biggest struggle to try to communicate in not just to you as council members, but also in the community. So when projects are thought about, we don't really know how much something's going to cost or what trouble is going to be uncovered until we start getting into the project and the design and right-of-way purchases, et cetera. What happens often, and I think this is where the decision points have to come in. So this project is in need of 2.1 million to fund. And remember, when we had our first strategic meeting, we said, these are the staff's best recommendations for funding. Council can always go back and say, you know what, we want to finish this for 2.1 million and take other things off the list. I don't think that that was something that that the council wanted to do in the last two workshops, because those are also competing projects, some of which we needed just a little bit of money to fund, et cetera. So the struggle that the staff always has is the limited amount of money and then what to do. And I think that this is one that you could make a decision that you decide you might want to do that, or if we have the American Recovery Act and it allows us to do different types of things, we would bring something back. For example, we know the American Recovery Act is not going to allow us to build roads, but it may allow us to supplant money into the streetscape project for some of the drainage or stormwater improvements, which will free up more money that we're setting aside in terms of general fund in another project or something, and bring that forward. But when we looked at the projects for this year, if you had chosen this roundabout, which is needed, and I completely understand it, that would be your CIP for the general fund this year, that 2.1 million. So there is still an opportunity to do that, but we're at that horrible end of the game where to put something like this on, you got to take something else off.
Yeah, but I think part of it is that like one roundabout is 5.5 million. Like there's something about that seems like, is that really the the cost? I mean, our 20 million is like not going to get us. I mean, and that's why I go back to tactical urbanism. Why can't we do this with a planter and some paint and say, let's do a cheaper roundabout? Because 5.5 million for one roundabout. I'm going to continue saying this out loud because I read these articles and hear these podcasts from cities that do this stuff. Like they somehow communicate to the staff, or the staff comes forward with it and says they want to do it. And we have some block where we're only willing to do stuff to the finished state at the very highest level. And then we end up with a stop sign in the middle of two roundabouts on Leucadia Boulevard for 15 years.
I hear you. Some cities also do not pay for real estate. They take it. So, you know, we have made a policy decision not to do those things, but some cities just take the real estate and move forward. So there's a lot of different, I mean, I don't want us to get too down the rabbit hole here with this because it didn't make the list. It's very frustrating. I get it. We can move money around, but I can't magically find you 2.1 million. It is what it is.
I know.
But I think that there are, you know, this is close to the finish line. And I would say that this is a great example of a project that if, as we look at our revenues over the next few months, that we really see this tremendous surge that some people are predicting when the state opens back up, this would be one that I don't want to speak to for Director Daughtry, but this might be one that we would say, you know, we should come back and fund this. That being said, I can see the wheels turning with other council members who are like, well, wait a minute, if we get $2 or $3 million, maybe I want to fund this other thing. So we'll be back to this and there will always be choices. But I do have to stick by the staff that once they do get good numbers, they're the numbers.
Right. Okay, good. I'm sorry. The other council members want to speak to you. Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is a good segue actually to bring something up that we talked about recently with my colleagues here and I want to just highlight it again to the public as well, that we had talked about assessing our own strategies and policies as far as how we budget. And I think my colleague, Councilmember Mosca, brought up the idea of a blue ribbon panel or put together a group that will help us refine how we make these decisions and how we don't come to the situation where we have a project only partially funded and we're not quite sure what to do. So I know that our city manager is tasked with coming back to us with a recommendation there. So I look forward to hearing that, but I think we have a lot of opportunity to help craft this in a way where our decision-making milestones are a little bit more structured so that we hopefully don't end up in a position where we have projects we're passionate about that we don't have enough money to fund. So I just wanted to use this as an opportunity for that segue to remind people of that. But the reason I raised my hand, I did want to talk about a couple things, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. You might note that the Santa Fe Drive Corridor Improvement Project is funded, and I'm happy to see that it did make the funding list, but it's also on the unfunded list. And I just wanted to explain how that happened. And it was kind of the process recommended by our mayor to go out to the project and look at it and determine with staff, well, what is our primary objective behind this project? And how can we get our first phase of what we're going to do to fit within the money we have available? And I actually think that was a really good process that we went through, and we're still, I know that city staff is still in the process of fine tuning that, but reminding ourselves where our initial funding came from and what was the primary objective to that corridor improvement project. And then defining what we could move forward and keep our funding behind. That's what you see in the funded projects in what we're proposing. And then it's also in the unfunded or the not funded projects, because there's a larger idea that could still be achieved and that the public is in support of, but it is not, that portion is not funded. So I wanted to explain that to people if they're curious about how that happened. I do also want to make 2 points. One is we've been getting a lot of interest and some really well thought out support behind the sand volleyball addition to our community park. And I believe now is the right time for me to bring this up as a project that I'd like to start characterizing in our capital improvement funds, if possible, to start with what's I think is being characterized as the feasibility study, but it has to do with the major use permit, but it's the first step that would be required to assess the project and to determine other aspects of what it's going to cost. I would like to ask our staff if we can incorporate this sand volleyball courts into our I guess you'd call it, well, it'd be the 22-23 budget, if possible. So I understand we're fully structured there as far as what we're showing, but I do want to throw that in, and I do want to capture this project as something that I would like to fund, and I'd certainly be interested in my colleagues' thoughts on that as well. Another thing I'd like my colleagues' thoughts on is another approach to how we want to capture the cross connection in North Leucadia. It's a third idea of how to do it, and that is we know it's important. I think across the board we've all. I hope I'm not speaking inappropriately for others, but I've heard people talking. We do know that this is a priority. It's important to get people across the rail tracks there. And we've agreed to the feasibility study. I'm totally still in support of that, but I don't want to strand $400,000 just in suspense because we're concerned we're not committed to whatever the next step is. I would prefer instead to commit to what that next step is and include a cross connect for North Leucadia as one of our projects on our not funded list. And I see our not funded list as projects that we know are important, that we've talked about, we've coalesced around, but we haven't figured out how they're going to get funded yet. So I see that, or we haven't figured out how much they're going to cost yet. So we're not even ready to fund it. So I see that putting projects on our not funded list helps us to capture that kind of project in a way that commits to it. It shows we're committed to it, but we don't have enough information yet. So that's another way that we could proceed with the North Leucadia cross connection. And speaking about our not funded list, and I'm looking at it on my screen, it's on page 108 of the staff report. I would like to see the Pacific View campus put back on the not funded list. It went from being an important project that looked like it might receive some funding to not even anywhere on the list. And I think that that's not appropriate for what its status is in how we're considering it as a city. So Pacific View campus on the non-funded list. And that's it for my comments.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hensy.
I'll keep mine short because I know we're running over time here, but I did have many questions related to streetscape, which I'll hold for that meeting next week. But in the meantime, I really hope that we can become clear on the right-of-way that we still need for streetscape and be clear about that in part of the presentation to the extent possible next week. And also just understanding like when we lock in that interest rate and how much are we paying it on the principal, or are we paying back on the tranches that I now see that we have. So those are the questions I hope we can have answered for next week. And then I'm really glad that Councilmember Lyons brought up Santa Fe, because I was going to talk about that too and say that I'm happy a smaller version of the project has landed back here in the next fiscal year. And I will just say that I hope we can make good on the requests of our school district partners at San Diego Union High School District, where they've asked for a mid-block crossing to be prioritized, and some of these aspects of the corridor project that seem to be higher importance to the school. I hope we can include those as part of the funding. And then lastly, I'll just say that I support the direction I hear my colleagues Lyons and Krantz going in, where we are not taking away this $400,000 or at least a big portion of this $400,000 away from the priority of a cross-connect opportunity in North Leucadia, because that need is not going to go away. It's only going to become more urgent. And I know in the years leading up to the streetscape project, we put aside money every year to get to the point where we could break ground. And there was a lot of money amassed by the time that we could break ground. And that's the only reason that we could go forward with phase one, even though we hadn't borrowed yet. And so I would almost take it a step further, say, I hope that we can put some money back towards the North Leucadia crossing in whatever format we find feasible, but that from now on, we're putting money towards that every year to make sure that when the time comes and we've identified the opportunity, we're able to at least put some down payment towards it. That's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Krantz.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I brought up the sand volleyball courts at the community park last meeting, and there wasn't any interest expressed. So I'm very pleased to hear Councilmember Lyons bringing it up tonight. I do think that it is time to take a look at some of the additional uses we might be able to implement on the community park grounds. So for my money, I would like to see feasibility or studies, whatever studies are required to tee this up for the conditional use permitting process, to consider both the volleyball courts and some additional, some dedicated pickleball courts. So those are my two requests. And I don't, putting it in the second year budget makes sense. I would obviously like to accelerate that, but given the resources, I think that moving it out is not unreasonable. So if we could make that addition, I don't know if it takes a motion or how you want to do it, but I would move that we allocate the money for that type of study for 22-23, or is it 21? Yeah, 22-23.
Let's hear from the city manager here. She has her hand up too.
I actually have my hand up. I just wanted to clarify for the folks who may be listening on the Santa Fe project, that in a previous council work session was shown as unfunded for general fund monies to go towards that project. The project has been scaled back a bit to maximize the grant funding that we received. So I just want to clarify that so nobody thought that we moved general fund money and took something out of something else. With regard to the sand volleyball courts, I appreciate it. It's a little too late for this budget year. Our work plan is already pretty full. This is a major use permit that would be opened up, and that is a project that would be done by the planning department or community development, not Parks and Recreation. And their plate is a little bit full this year. So duly noted that you'd like to see some monies budgeted for the second year, and that would be extremely helpful to allow us the time. And it also would give us some time to better assess what that cost would be for a feasibility study. That was all I wanted to say. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you for everyone's comments. So I think we need to go to a different link to log in to the next meeting. So,
excuse me, Mayor, there was a motion on the floor.
Yeah.
Okay, so your motion was, can you repeat your motion?
To fund the study necessary or open the conditional use permitting process in 22-23 budget for some new amenities at the community park, including sand volleyball court and pickleball court.
Okay, so city manager, that you would put that into the second year budget and that would come back. Is that, how do you feel about adding that in?
Yeah, we will put a plug number into the budget. What you'll recall in your second year budget is this time next year, you'll actually re-adopt the second year with any changes. So we'll put a plug number in just so that you can adopt the budget on the 23rd, which will be a minimal amount of, $30,000 or something like that. And then as we get closer to your adoption of your second year of this 2-year budget, where you make changes, we'll bring back what that cost would be. So that you'll know what that will be, because I'm not convinced it's the 30,000 that people have been referring to. I'm not even sure where that came from, but I'm happy to put it in for the second year because I know you'll have another bite at that apple.
Okay, so we'll have you can provide more information about the actual cost in a future time. Yeah. Okay. I'll go ahead and second your motion, Councilmember Kranz.
Okay, didn't Joy do that? Either way.
Okay,
Appreciate
great.
it.
If she already did she?
No, I
Or
didn't.
maybe I second her motion.
I didn't have the motion. I have Deputy Mayor Kranz as the motion maker, and then I have Mayor Blakespear as the second.
Okay.
Hey, Madam Mayor, City Clerk, or the moving party, could we have a clarification of that motion? It's not actually allocating money. It's putting it in 22-23 CIP list or list of possible expenditures, and the city manager will come back to us with additional information in terms of what that line item is and any consequences of adding a line item.
So what I was planning to bring back, Councilmember Mosca, is for purposes of your 2-year budget adoption on June 23rd, I will put in a plug number of about $30,000, which would be the price that's being quoted by folks as doing a feasibility study of volleyball courts at Encinitas Community Park. When it goes into the second year budget, that means we wouldn't do any work on it until July 1 of 2022. And prior to July 1 of 2022, if I find that the cost of a feasibility study is $100,000, then when you are readopting your second year of your 2-year budget, I'll let you know that it's $100,000 to do that. And I don't mean to be facetious about it at all, but I will tell you that it does feel a little bit like we are going to study another capital improvement that will go on the unfunded list. So I want you to think about that in terms of putting it in, which is why I like the idea of doing a feasibility of what it may cost and what the process would be to do that. But I would be lying if I told you that I was excited about it, because I'm not. But I'm happy to move forward because this is the policy direction that you want to take. But I don't believe the numbers that are being bandied about how much it could potentially cost. But there's not enough time for me to square all that away for your budget adoption in 2 weeks.
I just want to follow up that comment by saying that I appreciate her bringing her knowledge and expertise to this conversation. And everybody's certainly familiar with the challenges we have with resources, but we got a lot of emails from people who support sand volleyball. I know there are a ton of people in the community who are actively engaged in pickleball playing. And I think much like the conversation around the aquatic center, this is something that we could advance as a fundraising opportunity, as a naming right, as a club. There's a ton of things that we could do, but if we haven't advanced this to the point where we know it's possible and legal and what it will cost, then we can't really engage in that conversation. So I think that it's important that we take this that we take this step.
Councilmember Mosca.
No, so just comment on the motion. I'll support the motion because I think it's essentially us looking at this a little bit more. But I think that this process, we haven't been able to, in my mind, really kind of meet the needs of the community as we've kind of, we've been talking about different projects and we've been setting expectations, and and I'll just throw out there the Trail 82, and a whole host of other projects that that we've been spending years on, and that I desperately want to move, and I desperately believe to my heart that and you know that will make a difference for people in our community, and I definitely am, you know, I understand that what people want in terms of different amenities, and I support having more amenities, even an aquatic center at the park. But it just feels like, you know, we've been looking at all these projects and we've been scratching our head that we continue to do all these different studies and not have an understanding of what the final price is going to be. And here we're basically, you know, saying, okay, let's put another study and it may cost 30,000. Oh, it comes back, it's 150,000. Oh, then it comes back and it says it's going to be, you know, several. And I know that people say, oh, it's not going to cost that much. But, you know, who would have thought the Hygeia roundabout would cost $5 million? Rancho Santa Fe Trail went from $1 million to $5 million. And that's in today's market value. So I just think, like, you know, before we start spending more money and looking at more studies, that we can't actually, you know, do the entire project. I hope that what comes back is a little bit more understanding of what it would cost to kind of do this study and open up the major use permit, and what it would cost to actually, you know, build these projects. And, you know, I mean, yeah. And so I want to make sure that we're not basically launching into another item that we can't fund. But I do think it's important to add these amenities. And I do think I would love to be able to put it on our plan and to identify it so that when other things are taken off the list, such as some of the trails that we've been advocating for, such as the mobility options from El Camino Real to Willow Spring to Village Parkway to, you know, Rancho Santa Fe to La Costa, all of these that are in the queue, that we're not starving those projects of any money. Because every dime, 30,000, 100,000, 200,000, I want for these projects, and other folks want them to be funded as well. So all of that's to say, I'll support the motion, but I really think that we need a lot more information.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think you really make great points that we all need to remember. And, you know, it goes back to Joy's point of, like, how are we budgeting? Like, where's our discipline? How are we making decisions? What's the criteria we're using? Instead of it just being, you know, the wind and the waves and whatever happens to be the hot spot and where we personally feel. And, you know, how do we do this with consistency and discipline? And I mean, I think to me that this, because it's in the second year out and she's going to get back to us with actual costs, then we'll be able to have that discussion with a little more full information. So you know, to me, it doesn't seem like there's really not a lot lost right here. But in the bigger picture, I absolutely hear you and completely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, and let's hope that we can use some park mitigation funds, you know, some of the development mitigation funds for this. We're not talking about general fund money, I hope. And certainly I don't prioritize this over so many of the other things that are on our list of unable to do.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and vote.
Councilmember Hensy?
Yes.
Councilmember Lyons?
Yes.
Councilmember Mosca? Yes.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor
Yes.
Crayons?
Yes.
And Mayor Blakespear?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
I try to wait for a second to say whatever I'm going to say, but it still doesn't work. I don't know. I don't know what the delay is.
We can see you, I just can't hear you.
No,
I'll sign language it.
Well, no, what you should do is you should say, my vote is yes. Because then it like catches, it's like silent through my vote and then is yes, we'll hear it.
I'll do that.
I would like to make one other motion to consolidate that 400,000 and 250,000 into a cross connection, Northwest Leucadia cross connection railroad fund. And that way we show the community that we are preparing for the next steps, whatever they may be.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so just when there's a motion in a second, we can have discussion. So I am unwilling to support putting together two projects that are on either sides of that V and saying we're going to park this over here. I feel like we just had multiple-hour conversation about all of the mobility needs that we have in this city, and that is not smart. I mean, we need that 400,000 for these other things. We need it for streetscape. We need it for these other projects. And so to park it there while we study what's going to happen is it's just not smart. I mean, I just can't support that. And I urge my colleagues to reconsider that support of that and to look out for the needs of the entire city, recognizing how much those needs in Northwest Leucadia are. There are also all these other projects that are really important. And I'm willing to support the 400,000 if that was the way my colleagues who are in that corridor wanted to do it. That's where we had the money before, but there was a desire to change direction, and that first step of that change direction is 250. So I really think that's a mistake, and I hope that we don't move forward with that. Councilmember Mosca.
I think Joy, Councilmember Lyons had her hand up first, so I would defer to her.
Okay, Councilmember Lyons.
All right, thank you, Mayor. I may not have been as clear as I intended to be earlier. What I intended to say earlier is that I do not support the carrying that 400,000 associated with the cross connect, but what I do support instead is identifying the cross connection in Leucadia as a important priority that's listed on our not funded list, because we don't know what it is yet. We'll learn a lot by this feasibility study. We'll learn if it's feasible, and then we will learn what the cost will be for the design and for the construction. We're not there yet, but we know that this is an important project. So I want to capture it and its importance. It's just not funded yet. So I'm hoping I clarified, and so I wouldn't support this.
Was that a substitute motion? No.
Well, just let us have a vote on 2 to 3 or whatever,
Well, I mean, you can make a substitute motion that says, let's make it, put it on the unfunded list and call it cross connect and establish it as a priority. Councilmember Mosca.
So I think that these are all good comments. And then, I think that we've done that before in terms of what Councilmember Lyons is talking about is showing our support for it if there's a feeling like there's not a support for it by creating a line item that's unfunded. And I'm certainly not opposed to that. And just so that we're not talking in kind of up in the air and abstract about parking money or not parking money, I just wanted to ask the city manager, I know that we're basically, we've accounted for every dime in the coffers. And so I assume that not parking this money in a line item and not using it in this fiscal year, but just kind of parking it there. What are we using it for? And so if I said, let's just park it there and let it idle for a year or two, what am I saying no to?
So it would just come from fund balance. So our fund balance is right at 2 million. So we take the fund balance down to 1.6 million. And it just sits there. The reason why we don't like that is that it kind of ends up like the fund for the La Costa, where it's like there's money squirreled away. But it's possible that you could say, hey, we're just going to put that there for general mobility, et cetera, for La Costa. And we make a commitment that we would come back to you with projects, just like we would do that for once we get feasibility for, let's say, the Rancho Santa Fe Task Force. We'll come back and say, this is how much we think that we should set aside, et cetera. We set aside a little bit for that. So what's difficult, and what I did explain to the Now Leucadia folks when I talked with them yesterday, is that when money just sits there, it means that it's not available for other things. By taking it from fund balance, you can certainly do that. But then I will remind you of that in January when somebody comes back and says, do you want to, can we do this? And it wasn't funded, and et cetera. So you do have money in your ending year fund balance. You just have to be very judicious with it. That's all.
All right. I think that the fact that we're kind of pivoting a bit and moving down a different direction, I think that we should give that direction a possibility. And, you know, if we pivot back, I mean, I hope that we're able to do at grade crossings. You know, this is something Leucadians have been asking for some time. I remember just kind of serving on the mobility committee, and this is something that a lot of folks in the Northwest were asking for. They were asking for, you know, at grade crossings, and so now we're basically pivoting back to that conversation, and we're spending money to do that. And so my hope is that actually pans out. If it doesn't, I'm not sure when that pivot point will come. It sounds like this could be a year, 2 years. I mean, it may not be like tomorrow that we pivot back. And so, you know, making sure that we're providing opportunities for connections is so critically important, and I'm absolutely supportive of that. And so I think whenever we're ready, if we have to pivot back and we have to fund additional studies, I'm prepared to do that. But I think kind of just idling money in an account for a year or two makes no sense to me. And so, yeah, I won't support the motion. But I think that if there's a need to pivot back, hopefully there's not, but if there is, I'm ready to pivot back and do whatever we need to do to get as many crossings as we need for every part of our city.
So I'm going to make a substitute motion that we create an unfunded cross-connect item, as Councilmember Lyons has said, and that we continue to fund the $250,000 at-grade Leucadia analysis that's in the current budget.
Second.
Okay. Councilmember Crayons.
I'm going to use a basketball analogy regarding this pivot. We've just inbounded the ball from the baseline and we're dribbling up the court. We're not very far. We're shifting gears a little bit, moving towards the center of the court. It's not like we're turning around and throwing the ball back to the baseline. It's a project that is cross connect. And the reason I didn't push it last time is because what's going to happen is we're going to finish our study, and then there's going to be another number that we got to fund in order to design whatever it is that we're going to design. And I'll come back hard and get that money and work with my colleagues to get that funded. And so that was fine from where I sat. But the feedback I got from the community is that we need this money allocated so we know you guys are serious about this. And so I made a commitment that I would advocate for it, and I have done that. And you know, it's kind of a weird situation, but you know, we'll have a vote here, and there will be a decision made. But this idea that we're talking about apples and oranges is just foreign. This is a cross connection. It'll be either at grade or grade separated, and we need to commit to the community that we're going to find the funding to design that.
Councilmember Hinsey.
Yeah, I'm with Tony on this one, in that we're going to have this study and we want it to be completed with a date certain. And so, you know, I know we're told, like, once we get the contract and we have the study in motion, it's just going to be a couple of months before we get to an answer. And either way, this new direction is an investment in the ultimate project. And so even if we get to the point where we realize that it's not feasible to do at-grade crossings, we know that we're talking in tens of millions of dollars to get a grade separated crossing. And so to me, either way that this pans out, this $250,000 is a really good investment to be able to say to the community, look, we tried another option. We tried to have multiple locations for a crossing, and it turns out that it's not going to work. So we're putting all of our eggs in the basket of a single at-grade crossing. And I think that on this particular conversation, it's disappointing, the feeling of Groundhog's Day that I have, that I feel like this time last year, we were making these commitments to Northwest Leucadia. They've stayed engaged in this conversation throughout the whole year. And what they're hoping for is that we can keep up this momentum by having some money that's set aside to keep us on to the next option once this one pans out or doesn't pan out. And so for that reason, I'll vote no on the substitute motion.
Okay, and I just want to say that I just think it's important that I understand how great of an advocate the two of you are for Leucadia. I think we're budgeting for the entire city here, and we're borrowing $20 million for Leucadia. We are doing projects on Vulcan. We're investing in what you both want as your preferred option for the crossing of the rail corridor, which is not what I want. I would rather spend 400,000 on something I know will lead us to a crossing sooner, but I'm deferring to you in these ways of saying, okay, this is the direction the two of you want. And so we do need to also think about all the people on Rancho Santa Fe Road who are advocating for the improvements to their road, the people who want Santa Fe improvements, every single other thing that we talk about all the time, and even the things that are coming up tonight. What about homelessness? What are you doing about affordable housing? Are you going to buy something and build affordable housing? I mean, a lot. What about Pacific View, as Joy said? And so the idea of saying, okay, we're going to fund multiple alternatives that are in direct conflict with each other in this Northwest Leucadia is just, I just absolutely cannot support that. And that's why I'm making the substitute motion. Councilmember Mosca.
I also think it's in addition to what the mayor just said, I think it's unfortunate to classify this as like, you know, in some way that we're not supporting the Northwest and their desire to have more funding for crossings. Let's go back to the fact that this was a study. It was in line item, a project funded, you know, for $400,000 for a study. We've decided to pivot to a different study, and so I just think that that in terms of the projects, this one project was committed to, one project is being done, and so like just like, you know, Deputy Mayor Kranz talking about putting in another project in terms of sand volleyball courts, which I'm all for, but was never in the queue. And if it's going to get in the queue, it's got to compete with all the other projects that we've promised to our residents, from Rancho Santa Fe to Willow Spring, all of these projects. So it's got to compete with that. And so I respect the advocacy, but there was one project in the queue, and now you're advocating for two projects. So I think it's unfortunate to classify this as a lack of faith, because we have faith. If your study, be it a at grade or grade separated, you know, proves successful, we'll be there to fund it. We'll be there to talk about a project. But until then, you know, you had one project in the queue, you now still have one project. That one project is less money, right? But that doesn't mean that we basically just keep funding idle there. I think that we have, as Councilmember Lyons said, we have all expressed, you know, just a major support for this. It is clear that this part of the city needs more crossings. It absolutely needs more crossings. So let's embark upon a journey, a exploration of what's going to get us there. You've chosen to put forth a motion to basically look at grade crossings. Okay, we'll look at grade crossings, but we're not going to basically just park money there for what may come. We support it. And so once you get there, let's talk about a project, but that project also has to compete with all the other projects in the city.
Okay, so let's go ahead and vote on the substitute motion.
Okay, Councilmember Hensy,
No.
Councilmember Lyons,
Yes.
Councilmember Mosca,
My vote is yes.
Deputy Mayor Kranz,
No.
Mayor Blakespear.
Yes.
Motion carries with Hensy and Kranz voting no.
Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break until 6:40, and then we'll log into our council meeting.
Perfect, thank you.
So with that, we're adjourned.